Well, welcome back to Conflict of Interest, to our US election special. We're joined now by Professor Richard Tanter, who's the director of the Nautilus Institute at RMIT University. Peter, foreign policy, Obama, what does it all mean?
Yeah, I'm fascinated by the foreign policy aspects. And what I really want to ask you is this. Do you think between now and the inauguration, beginning of next year, there'll be some try-ons from states like North Korea, Iran, who will test the waters as to whether the lame duck presidency can deal with them, and then, or maybe when Obama gets in.
Well, I think the testing goes on, starts from day one, and I think there's a sense in which Obama is a bit of an enigma. Nobody really knows the questions you've been talking about. You don't. I'm not surprised.
But I mean, but I'm saying the North Koreans don't know.
No, nobody knows, and I think that means that even leaving aside the slightly malevolent suggestion about, say, North Koreans, that I think the Europeans will wanting to know, especially over economic issues for the moment. China most certainly will want to know. Clearly, the rough ones will come. North Korea is pretty puny in the real stakes.
Well, yes, but they're mad.
Russia and Iran, and Russia in particular, and China. Yes. I think have got serious issues with the United States. Russia over missile defence, China over
Russia and Poland. But see, that's the
right.
missile defence.
That's a very serious issue there.
And Russia's actually threatened Poland, and when they agreed to the missile
defence itself is really not a very smart idea. It almost inevitably pushes the other side into escalation. So there's going to be pushing and shoving. But your basic point about testing out the new guy, yes, of course there's going to be. What form it will take, precisely when it will come, we don't know.
So you've got no guesses as to who you think will go, because all the others will be watching.
Who goes first?
If Russia has a go, well, Iran and North Korea will be watching.
I actually would look closer to home at the Europeans. They've got a huge stake in this. I think the starting point for this is that this election in foreign policy terms is about anyone but Bush. That the Bush presidency was such a radical foreign policy presidency, there'll be a real sense of how far is this guy going to move? And we don't really know the answer.
Will he move back to France, or, metaphorically speaking? Will he move towards the French?
Well, I think there are some very basic issues. Yeah. Really, under Bush, there was an enormous escalation of things like missile defence, which were very provocative for the Chinese. Secondly, torture, frankly, was institutionalised and legalised, and that was kind of very shocking, not just for, ordinary left liberals, but even for mainstream European opinion. They'll be rolling back there. Questions about climate change. Bush was fundamentally a climate change denier. He moved in a realist sense. Lastly, there are the questions of the wars, Iraq and Afghanistan. Bush started wars which were very much against American interests in terms of leaving aside one's feelings about 9/11 and the response to that. In terms of these wars, Europeans, the Chinese, and to a lesser extent the Russians are going to be looking at what are they going to do about all of those issues. And that's going to be the first, not so much test as I think there'll be a lot of feeling out first.
Richard, what does it mean, just bringing it closer to home, what does it mean for the US-Australia alliance?
Look, I think there's a lot of anxiety. Australia goes into a panic whenever anything changes across the Pacific. Now, a great deal of our fundamental foreign policy is making sure the big guy across the other side of the lake is engaged with us.
Has Kevin Rudd rung Obama?
Well, there'll be that thing. And how close is their personal relationship? Are they on mate terms? This is nonsense. Basically, the United States has a permanent interest in this part of the world. Yeah. We are very closely tied in through the intelligence bases at Pine Gap.
It's not a personality issue.
It's not a personality issue. It does make a great deal of difference whether the programs are more or less on the same page. However, I think that Obama has got a lot more to think about than Australians' views at the moment.
Well, interestingly, there was a piece I read recently, I think in the Australian, where talking about the foreign policy analysis of foreign policy speeches by Obama. Not one mention of Australia. McCain mentioned Australia quite a few times.
Yeah, but look, Australia doesn't rank.
It doesn't rate.
No, I think we have this. We really have to get used to the fact we are a small country.
Small country, small player.
Indonesia matters. I've just come back from Jakarta, and I can just tell you the feeling there about Obama.
It's very positive.
Yeah, it's very positive.
Well,
and I actually think that's
a Muslim country.
He spent time there. He spent time there.
He was the fact. Not the Muslim part doesn't matter. You know perfectly well. What does matter is that he spent time there. But it does matter that he's a black president. The fact that America has, after 200 years, finally, produced from a quarter of its population, by the definitions functionally in the United States.
I thought he was white. Why isn't he a white president? Isn't it racist to call him
very,
black?
very different.
I think it's racist to call him
black. Hang on, let's go.
I think that matter of identity is very important.
I think it's very important. Let's talk about one of his immediate foreign policy challenges is surely what's happening in Africa. Congo, destabilisation.
Well, it's
Africa
his
is the
continent.
poorest,
Well,
It's
I
where his
think-
people came from.
I think one of the key things
he
is going to be
gonna do?
Somalia, where there's a huge economic interest in making sure that something is
Yeah.
done about piracy there. And it's not a matter of just sending in the gunboats. In fact, they've had gunboats there for quite a long time. That's not enough. Piracy actually is a much more complicated
Sending
issue.
the Black Hawk
And
helicopters.
particularly Bush, that's a good thing you mentioned that. I mean, basically Bush
I've seen the
supported
movie.
the Ethiopian invasion of Somalia, which destroyed the only functioning kind of quasi-state they had there
But
under the Islamic
Somalia's-
Union of
but
Courts.
Somalia have the problem with Islam, you see.
What's the problem with Islam?
What's the problem with Islam now?
In Somalia.
It's a bit like
But,
communism.
but what's the problem of Islam as a problem? I'm not
Well,
following
well,
you.
because that's going to confront him with how he's going to deal with Islamic,
Well, it's going to.
radical Islamic state.
I think at the end of the day, US interests.
Well, I think that's very much
Well,
the case.
we'll see.
Always served
And certainly there are
by US
conservative
interests.
Islamic
Maybe
states
he'll
who know
want to
them
sit
well.
down with them and talk to them like he's going to do with Ahmadi
The-
Jihad from Iran. He'll
really-
sit down and
the
talk
Well,
to
let's
them.
talk. Let's talk about
Will
the
he
Middle
go
East.
to
I mean,
Africa?
he gave a glowing. I mean, I have to tell you, I don't expect a lot of change in the Middle East.
No.
That'd be my assessment.
Oh, I do.
You'd get status quo.
I think Israel's got problems.
Well,
Why?
Israel's had problems for a long time.
No,
they're
but
not of
Israel-
America's making.
But
No, no,
realistically, Israel is a problem, and Israel is the largest recipient of American aid. That will continue.
Well, I
the
don't
real
know.
problem is how do they exit from Iraq?
Can I
mean,
tell you something? I reckon that Israel has got to make a decision at some stage soon whether it's going to attack Iran to destroy the nuclear facilities.
I
Now,
think I think
that's off the
every
agenda.
American president is
think
saying.
yes, but I think Obama will not wear that.
Well, no,
I don't think
Bush
any-
wouldn't have worn it.
Well,
no
I
American
think
president
Bush would have had to wear it. Obama will not wear that. So I think Israel's problem now is it go it on its own and lose America, or does it take the risk of having a significant part of its population wiped out?
It's about to get a
by
new
Iran?
prime minister who I think has no stomach for it.
And I think, and Israel has its own problems. I mean, closer to home. I mean, the much greater problem for Israel is still dealing with the question of is it one state or two, Palestine and Israel, or a larger state, and how are they going to face up to those issues? On the question of Iran, it's still not finally clear what the Iranians are doing. They're certainly, like the North Koreans, bearding the other guy very, very
Yeah.
hard. They have been pushed around for a long time by almost everyone on nuclear issues, so they're very, they fundamentally feel betrayed successfully by the Europeans, the Russians, the Americans on nuclear issues. Every country you go to, in most developing countries you go to, you find this assertion when the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty comes up, that we don't care about nuclear weapons, what we care about is our right to nuclear energy. It's one of those kind of third world non-aligned rights. The Iranians are leading the charge on that at the moment. Now, absolutely everything has to be done to make sure they don't get near nuclear weapons. And Obama has been actually very strong on a number of those issues. I think, though, that there is going to be a serious question about Iraq. He's got to pull out ground troops from Iraq. He's got to bring the National Guard home.
Look, I don't
That's
understand.
got to happen.
Okay, let's say he pulls out of Iraq. Let's say that happens.
Yeah.
And they strengthen the forces in Afghanistan.
That's
But the insurrection will go back into Iraq
well. What I think
because Iraq will be undefended.
Well, I think the issue finally is is there enough left of Iraq civil society, political society to actually work it through and negotiate it? They've got to live with the fact that one consequence of the invasion of Iraq has been an immense strengthening of Iranian prestige. When for years the Americans had Iraq and Iran balancing in the Middle East, that's gone for the moment. Now, how do you do that? The main thing is, though, will the Americans be satisfied with bases in Saudi Arabia, or are they going to demand ongoing bases, in Iraq, which is in a sense an ongoing
Well, you're talking about not the
conflict?
Americans. Will Obama?
Well,
so I think
I
Obama's
don't
going
think
to
He's
pull
the
out.
president, mate.
Yeah,
I
not
think he's
the
the president, but
Americans.
it's not.
It'll be will Obama be satisfied? I think we're going to see a move towards a more, America retiring into itself.
No, I
Socialist.
don't.